Hey students, how's it going? I'm back and ready for our next lesson. Just a quick recap. We've been working on geometry. Uh, we had some angles review, and we talked a little bit about triangles and the sum of all angles in triangles, triangle sum theorem. Then we talked about Pythagorean theorem and similar triangles. And that brings us to today, which we're going to step away from triangles specifically and talk about area and perimeter. Okay, now we can use area and perimeter for triangles, but we're not specifically only looking at triangles. So let's talk about area and perimeter. Okay, so first off, perimeter is pretty basic, pretty easy to understand. Basically, if you want a definition for perimeter, it's a measurement around the outside of a space. Okay, and so regardless of what the shape is, if you're asked to find the perimeter, then you need to measure around the space. If you have all the sides to a shape, you just add them all together. If you don't have all the sides, then you might need to do a little work to figure out what all the sides are, but then add them together. Okay, so perimeter is just the measurement around space. Okay, real life problems for perimeter would be like if you want to put a fence around your yard, you need to measure the distance around your yard so you know how much fencing to buy. Okay, so perimeter, not a whole lot to talk about really. We'll do some problems with perimeter, but you know, there's not really a whole lot of formulas you need to figure out or know to do perimeter of space. So perimeter, measurement around an object or space. Brings us to area. Okay, area is a measurement of two-dimensional space. It's a measurement of two-dimensional space. Okay, so actually I feel like geometry is pretty useful in life, maybe more so than algebra. Most people don't think you use algebra at all, even though you do, but you know, you're not getting equations out and working them out in real life. But in geometry, you know, it is a little bit useful. So for instance, area, if I want to describe how big my house is, that's an area measurement. I'm measuring how many square feet are taken up by my floor, basically. I'm measuring my floor and describing it in square feet. If I want to paint my walls, I need to know how much paint to buy. So I need to measure my walls. Thing is with area, you're measuring a space. And so you can't just go from one point to the other. That doesn't fully describe the space. So for most spaces, you need to describe in two dimensions. For instance, a rectangle or a square, you need to measure the width, but you also need to measure the height. Okay, so let's just take a look real quick. So there's the definitions. So I'm just going to take a rectangle here. Okay, and I could say, hey, go measure that rectangle. Probably just naturally, you would probably make a measurement this way. Let's say that's about 12 inches. And you very possibly would go ahead and measure it this way as well. Let's say that's 8 inches. Okay? You might call it 12 by 8. And that's a good description of it. But if I want to give it a single measurement, a number, then what I really need to do is follow a formula. So for each shape, you're going to have a different formula, but the most common one, like this, would be kind of like your wall. Length times width. So for a rectangle, your area formula is LW. L times W, length times width, okay? So 12 times 8. 12 times 8 is 96. Now, these measurements are in inches, and so technically the way that we would describe that is 96 square inches, which can be written a little bit more condensed this way. 96 square inches, okay? And so that would be the area of this space. You have to include not only the width, but also the height. Now you may wonder, why is it square inches? Okay, and that's a pretty good question, because this is a rectangle, it's not a square. If you measure a circle in area, it's still square units, or a triangle. And so let's take a look at what makes those square units. I'm going to do that with just a little bit easier numbers. Okay, looks like the same rectangle. This time I'm going to call it 2 by 3. Okay, I'm not even going to give it an actual unit. I'm just going to call it 2 by 3. So basically, if I take my height and split it into 2, it's going to look like that. I'm going to take my width and roughly section it off in 3. Okay, so notice what I've done there is I have went up 2 in the same increments and in the same increments over 3. Notice when I actually draw lines at each of those, it makes squares. It fills that space with squares. And so we can see 6 square units there. Had these been inches, there would be 6 square inches, 6 actual squares. And so when we're filling two-dimensional space, we are always filling them with squares, regardless of what shape it is, okay? So that's basically what area is. It's a two-dimensional shape that's being measured, okay? It's a measurement for that space. And by two-dimensional, I mean flat, okay? So real life would be, maybe you need to get carpet for a room, or you need to plant some grass seed. You have to measure your yard. Your yard is flat. I mean, it can be at a steep, or it can be at a slope, but itself is flat. Fertilizer is pretty common. Paint's pretty common. Measuring your house. These are all things that you probably need to know how to do. And so those are good examples of area measurements. Okay, so real quick now, I'm just going to go through some of the formulas for solving area problems. Okay, and in the email today, I have included a formula sheet. Now, what you need to know is when you take the HSE test, the task test, they don't give you formulas for area. Okay, they expect you to know those. And so I'm going to try and give you ways to remember those along the way. They do give you volume formulas, which is what we're going to be learning next. So area formulas, you want to take a look at one of these pictures. All right, here we go. Or one of these files. Here is a formula sheet that I sent with you. Notice on the left side it says shape, and on the right side it says formulas for area and circumference. Now, circumference is what we call perimeter, but of a circle. Okay, remember, perimeter is the distance around a space. That's what circumference is of a circle. It's got a special name though, because circles don't have multiple sides. They only have one continuous side that comes back around, okay? So when you think of perimeter, think of circumference when you're talking about a circle, okay? So take a look at some of these formulas. Triangle. Area is equal to 1/2 base times height. Rectangle. Area is equal to length times width. Trapezoid. Area is equal to 1/2 times the sum of base 1 plus base 2 times the height. That's usually the toughest one for people. Parallelogram. Area equals base times height. And circle. Area equals pi r squared. Pi times the radius squared. All right. So as you're doing these problems, you might want to reference this sheet. Okay. So triangle, rectangle, trapezoid, parallelogram, circle. I don't think you're going to have to know any other area formulas. So let's start with the rectangle. Okay. Remember, the rectangle is the one we just did. Let's go ahead and bring it on in here a little bit. So that's just length times width. Length times width, whatever that is your area for the rectangle. Okay. Now, when you look at the triangle formula is 1/2 base times height. But what I want to tell you is, in a rectangle, you can think of a base and a height as well. It doesn't have to be a length times width. And so really a triangle is the base times height cut in half, okay? And if you take a look at this rectangle, if we cut it in half corner to corner, we've turned it into 2 triangles. And so a triangle always has half of the area as a rectangle, okay? It's always half of a rectangle. And so that's kind of the way you're going to remember this formula. Think about a rectangle and how you would do it, base times height, but then divide it by 2, okay? One interesting thing about base and height, it doesn't matter if we're talking about the triangles here, we're talking about the trapezoid formula or the parallelogram formula. Anytime you see base and height, the base and the height must hit each other at a 90-degree angle, okay? So this works in a rectangle because those hit at 90-degree angles. When we're talking about a triangle, all right, if this was the base, then the height isn't shown right there. The height would have to be shown somewhere in that triangle where they can give you a 90-degree angle, okay? So your base and your height always must hit at 90 degrees. Okay, so triangle area is equal to 1/2 the base